For more reaction, let's now cross live to Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs in New Delhi. Welcome to the programme. Islamic State has reportedly claimed responsibility for the attacks. Does the group have the reach to carry out terrorism on such a large scale in the heart of Europe?
We haven't seen it yet, but there have certainly been lone wolf attacks affiliated to Islamic State, so-called wolf pack attacks. And this one, people are saying there are probably close to a dozen terrorists who are involved, and probably some still let loose as per rumors. So it means that it's a coordinated group attack. And it cannot obviously be purely homegrown or small scale. I mean, it reminds us in India about the Mumbai attacks 7 years ago, when it was exactly like this. It was, multiple centers in the city, all being hit simultaneously, and the terrorists being able to communicate with each other, taking people hostage, and terrible bloodletting. So it is clear that that attack was perpetrated by Pakistan-based jihadist groups. And this one, it does seem, is linked to the escalation of the French campaign in Syria. And I think it is definitely a response to that, whether it is IS directly or its affiliated groups, jihadist groups in the IS network. I think Al-Qaeda has lost some of its ability to carry out these kind of mass casualty attacks of late. So if you look at a suspect, the prime one will be IS.
Okay, we're having a little bit of difficulty getting a connection with our guest. Let me just try again before we say goodbye. Sreeram, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, let's just try again because we're having a little problem with our connection. We'll try another question here. The French president has ordered a state of emergency across the country. Some international airlines are also considering the suspension of flights to Paris. How big is the threat of more attacks across Europe, in your opinion, now?
Well, as you know, British tourists were targeted only a few months ago in Tunisia. And now we have this attack in Paris. Paris was attacked earlier this year as well. And I think as the European involvement in multiple wars against Islamic State and other jihadist groups increases, there are chances of more such attacks happening. As we know, a Russian aircraft crashed recently, and there are question marks about what is behind this. So clearly, it looks like these can be seen collectively as a blowback of the escalating campaign against Islamic State in Syria and Iraq.
Sreeram, we'll come back to you in just a moment. Please stay on the line because we want to get our audience up to date once again. Well, what France has been undergoing really in the past number of months. It's seen a string of deadly terror attacks by Islamic extremists in recent years as well. This is some of them.
Quelques secondes, on aperçoit clairement le terroriste intérieur en criant.
Sreeram, French security was thought to be tightened following the January attacks in Paris. It was always going to be difficult, of course, but how did they fail to prevent such a large-scale series of assaults?
Well, serious questions need to be asked about the intelligence and all that. In fact, there was a narrow escape a few months ago when a train was going to be attacked bound for Paris as well, and some Americans luckily subdued the killer. So all these means that definitely preparedness, there are chinks. But also remember, France has 10% of its population is Muslim, and some of whom are highly radicalized, and many of whom have also gone across to fight in Syria and Iraq. And the nightmare scenario of some of them gaining experience in the battlefields of Iraq and Syria and then coming back home and carrying out attacks, we cannot rule those out. So, and remember, there's also a degree of sympathy among the disenfranchised youth of the banlieues in Paris, who feel that they have been neglected. These are of Arab origin and have low employment and have not been integrated into French society. So it becomes easy for ISIS-affiliated groups to carry out this large-scale thing if they have strong local support. Last year, Rossiya Segodnia, the Russian agency, had an opinion poll which showed that 16% of French people supported ISIS and thought that it was doing a good job cleaning up the Shiites and the minorities in the Middle East. So this mentality, there's also anti-Semitism, which is linked to the attacks on the kosher market earlier this year in Paris. So all of these, if you add up, it's a combustible mix. So France has both an intellectual problem and a social problem to handle if it has to overcome this menace.
Apart from the direct tragic events we're talking about, the attacks have occurred as leading diplomats head to Vienna for a new round of talks on Syria. How will this dictate the talks, do you believe?
Well, I think the international community is coming together, and it is going to decide that we must continue a very hard campaign against jihadists of all hues, ISIS plus Al-Qaeda plus remnants of all other jihadist groups, many of whom are spreading this venom across the world and are creating the kind of atmosphere in which killing mercilessly on the streets in this kind of Fedayeen-style terrorist attacks have become more and more common these days. And it's because of, a socially permissive environment. So all the, concerned nations of the world must unite at this moment and must come together to have a common platform to counter ISIS. Unfortunately, President Putin has been calling for unity of all the so-called, groups, countries which have formed various groups and are fighting ISIS individually in Iraq and Syria. And now it's the time to unite. I think the talks that are coming up will be helpful to create this grand coalition that President Putin has called for, and which we in India also support, because we realize that if we are divided as the international committee, the terrorists will win.
And will it happen, do you think, just finally? Will the violence now boost international efforts to fight terror in Syria and Iraq?
They should. Unfortunately, the antagonism between Iran and Saudi Arabia has to some extent dampened the prospects of unity. But I am hopeful that Geneva, we had a good, recently Vienna, we had a good first round, and we are going to increase this diplomatic tempo. Because remember, we cannot be barbaric like the terrorists. We can be civilized, and the civilized way is to create a unified front against terrorism. And once we share intelligence, once we are in a position to do coordinated strikes, and once we also create new models of social engagement and harmony in many of these countries like France, which have broken down between majority and minority and so on, I think we can win this war.
Sreeram Chaulia, Professor and Dean of the Jindal School of International Affairs in New Delhi. Always great to get your thoughts. And we'll be back just after this.